You're listening to People Are Animals Too, Darn It, with your host, Mandy Evans, Executive Director of Panhandle Animal Shelter.
Hello and welcome to People Are Animals Too, Darn It. I'm your host, Mandy Evans, and I'm joined today by, and wait for it, it's a mouthful, Marc Peralta? Did I get it right?
Peralta, close enough.
Peralta.
You're close enough. Peralta.
Okay.
Yep.
Senior Director of National Mission Advancement for Best Friends Animal Society?
You nailed it.
All right. And then Jessica Gutmann, the Manager of Operations, Embed in Santa Rosa County, which is in Florida. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So what we wanted to talk about today is barriers. And we hear that word tossed around a lot. And we thought we would dive in to help people understand what is a barrier. Even if you're not in animal welfare, this is an opportunity to kind of understand some of the ins and outs of sheltering. So why don't we just kick it off with, what is a barrier?
Well, I think a
Go ahead,
barrier
Mandy.
is any, oh, sorry.
No, please, go ahead, Jess.
Okay. I think a barrier is anything that's going to prevent an animal from leaving the shelter and going into to have a positive outcome, whether that be a home or a rescue or even return to field. So anything that's being done to keep the animal from moving forward out of the shelter in a positive way, I think is a barrier.
Okay, and Marc, do you have anything to add?
No, yeah, just a little bit. I mean, I think we often get very trapped in thinking about finding the exact right person for an animal with the amount of animals that are going out. So we create a lot of sometimes illogical steps for people to be able to adopt or save an animal's life. And anything that you're looking to actually thin down the herd, so to speak, and finding the one right person for the animal based on your own perception, are really where a lot of these barriers come from. They come from a place where people are trying to do the right thing, but often are affecting more animals in a negative way because they're being so selective in regards to what they think is the right choice for an animal.
Right. So I'm going to take this barrier conversation one step further and say that there are also barriers to people being able to get assistance from the organization to keep their pet. And we can go into what those are later. Okay, so why are there barriers? And Marc, you kind of touched on this. So why do barriers exist?
I think, I'll start if it's okay, Jess. I think partially, Jess and I both come from sheltering background, and, she can illuminate on her experience. But from my experience, it almost was taught as a part of the culture of when I came into shelters to be distrusting of people, try to catch people in lies, making that a point of approval on doing a good job is, kind of being investigators. And really without the understanding of, how you set up questions can set people up to become liars, even if they're not, or sometimes trying to search for the right answer versus what's the true answer. So, I mean, to me, I feel like a lot of it is not always conscious, but it's been a part of a lot of animal welfare, whether it's rescue groups and shelters, part of the culture of when they've learned to come in and do adoptions or do foster care or provide assistance in an animal welfare perspective in the community.
Do you have anything to add, Jessica?
Yeah, I think that it's really fear-based, and it definitely is coming from a place of wanting to do the right thing for the animals.
Yeah.
But for example, if you're doing an adoption and you're looking at, they need a 6-foot fence because you're worried that they're going to escape and become a stray again, or you're worried that they're not going to have enough time at home to spend with the animal, and these kind of things. It's definitely it's coming from a place of wanting to find the best fit, but it's kind of counterintuitive because it's actually preventing the animal from going to a place where they're going to be loved. And who are we to really determine what that best fit for that animal is? That animal may not care if they have a fenced-in yard because maybe the owner takes them running every day or to a doggy daycare, or, there's a lot of different variables, but it comes from a place of fear. And I think that people really need to get past that and be brave and really kind of just put the trust and faith in people, which can be hard, especially when you've been working in shelters for a long time or municipal shelters, because unfortunately you see a lot of negative things. So it's easy to assume that a lot of people are maybe bad or don't have the best intentions of the animal. But honestly, a lot of people really do truly care and have the best intentions at heart. And it's up to us to really put our faith in our community and trust them and let them help us help the animals.
Yes. Okay, Jessica, you're like my new best friend. You're using my keywords. Yeah. Like fear and trust and being brave. Like that's a huge thing, is that we need to be brave. So I think that you touched on the fact that really they're there. And I'm going to give my personal bias, is that I think that we have barriers in place to more so serve us, to comfort our fear, to make sure that we are feeling like our neurological system is more at ease, because we have really done our best part to validate that this is a good decision. But like you said, it's not necessarily in place, or the outcome isn't really serving the animals. So let's just go through some of our programming that's traditional in shelters and talk about some of the barriers that you've seen, just so people can say, oh, I didn't even know that was a barrier. That is a barrier. Okay, so what are some of the common barriers around adoptions?
Let's see. Well, having a fenced-in yard, having animals at home that are spayed and neutered. I mean, as long as the animal they're adopting is spayed and neutered and not going to breed, does it really matter? That's a big one. Not letting cats outside. There's ways to counsel people to do that safely by having enclosures or leashes. But, you know, we also advocate for return to field as well. So there's kind of a balance to be had with that. Requesting information on prior vet records if their current animals are up to date on vaccinations. Checking with their landlord, checking if they have proof of home ownership. Those are some common ones that I see a lot.
Yeah, and even getting into those are really good examples. I think making people fill out a bunch of paper before they meet or see an animal. I think setting up procedures that, where people don't get back to people. So before you'll even talk to them, you have to submit an application, and oftentimes shelters or rescues do or don't get back to people at all. And like Jessica pointed out in really good and specific terms, having a bunch of questions that don't necessarily, help you define whether or not this is actually going to be a good home, because whether somebody has a fenced yard, doesn't have a fenced yard, it's really irrelevant in a lot of aspects. But a lot of it is us carrying on kind of similar methods to protect animals, but not really putting a lot of thought behind it and what they actually mean, or what they're actually trying to get from the question. And it's just, often looking for, a lot of times those are set up, especially in longer application processes. And I think it's easy for people to think, well, if you really care about this pet, you'll fill out these 6 pages. But it is a barrier. And if they go to a pet store, if they go to other places where they can easily find pets, it's so much easier of a process where they don't have to talk about every pet that they've owned and what happened to them or whatever else is being put on these things. And it's often a way for you, again, to try to find a way to say no, and versus trying to find a way to say yes. And whether we like it or not, we shop, we go places, we use the gas stations we go to, the clothing stores often that we shop at are based on convenience. We are a culture of people that want to be able to easily go and get what we want. And if you're making things difficult for people to find their pet, they have options, and often will choose those options that are easier to fit their needs. And then nobody wins, because they don't get to have the relationship that these rescues or shelters have that can provide a lot of resources. And they'll potentially go to a backyard breeder, or they'll go to someone else that's much easier for them to find a pet.
Yeah. And I would even say too, is that when you have a questionnaire, It starts to present people's shame, where they're like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, what if I fill this out wrong? What is the right answer? And then you get people to lie to you because they're thinking that they want to live up to your expectations. And then the
That's
people
right.
get mad that you lied to them. And obviously you're not a good person because you lied. We actually end up really creating, like you said, with pet stores and all that, the reality we're really trying to solve. And not, so by being more open and listening to people and understanding them, we actually get a more authentic and better feel of who we would be adopting to, rather than feeling pressured. I know for me, I mean, I go to the dentist. I went to the dentist yesterday, and I'm in the parking lot and I'm like sweating because I'm thinking, did I brush okay? Did I floss? I mean, they're not putting that on me. I'm putting that on me. And so when you look at people who already might have a high level of shame and they come into your shelter to adopt, they really want to prove to you that they're the best fit. And you hear all the stories. So having those really extensive long applications and even really hairy, like pointed interview processes can bring out the worst in people.
Absolutely.
Okay. What about return to owner?
Barriers for return to owner?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of times we want to punish, right? And not remember that even those of us that are the best pet owners, things happen. Our pets get out, somebody opens the door and they run out. So I think, with return to owner, in my experience, we tend to be very punitive and think that that's going to help people learn their lesson. And it goes back to what you said a little bit earlier, Mandy, like it makes us feel like, we're doing what we should and we're being responsible and we're teaching these people. But I think a lot of the aspect, we forget that those things happen to us as well. And to make it a barrier for people to get their animals back to them, especially people that have lower means, that really would have to sacrifice if they have to pay $75 for an impound fee, this much money for a new license, this much money because they're not spayed and neutered, whatever. Those can be massive barriers for individuals. And just because they don't have a lot of money doesn't mean that they're good pet owners. And I think if we could really remember the things that we actually have, happened to us ourselves, I don't know anybody. And great, if you've never lost your pet or it's never gotten loose or anything like that, hats off to you, but you're the exception, not the rule.
Absolutely. Jessica, do you have anything to add?
I also think on the topic of owner redemptions, I think it's important, obviously, to remove those barriers, but to have a conversation with these people, because there are things that we can help them with. For example, maybe they need a fence repaired, or they need some training advice, or maybe their dog is roaming because he's not neutered and there's a female dog down the street. Some shelters can offer vouchers to help get them spayed or neutered, which could cut down on that. So I think it's really our place in animal welfare, animal shelters, to try and help solve the problems and not just punish.
When I talk to shelters and they'll say, our community is so mean, like they come in and they're angry. And if we can focus on the fact that anger is driven by fear and sadness, and you think about the idea that the neighbor down the street had their dog found as a stray, brought into your shelter, and they were charged a $500 reclaim fee, and you had to have the pet spayed and neutered, I'd be spitting mad too that and I didn't mean to have my dog come in, but I love my dog. And so it's being driven from really a place of sadness. And if we can recognize that and say, you came here today to get your animal, you love your animal, because you clearly didn't have to come get your dog or your cat. Like really looking at it a little bit differently. Okay, food bank. What are some barriers to the community accessing free food for their pets?
I think transportation's a big one. We had Best Friends has a pet food pantry in Salt Lake City. And when I worked there, I would frequently help with the pantry, and it was a really good resource for the community. But the barriers that I saw were generally if people didn't have transportation or didn't have family or friends who could even transport them, or people that were homeless, they would be the ones that would have difficulty coming during the pantry hours. They may come off of the pantry hours, like during odd times, and we would do our best to serve them. But that's definitely one of the bigger challenges I saw for the pet food pantry.
Yeah, and I think, on top of that, I think that is the major one that came to my mind as well. But I go back to, sometimes people use pet food pantries or kindness services such as pet food pantries as punitive as well, right? They're going to use it to leverage you to do things that they want you to do. And sometimes, to Jessica's point, people don't want their animals to be at risk, but not everybody right away understands the benefit of neutering their animal or the benefit of whatever it is. And I think a lot of times pet food pantries are set up for a way to manipulate public into adhering to the things that specific group or that shelter want to do. And it's not a bad way to start to help them and have touch points and talk to them and those kind of things. But, withholding services from people that need a little bit more, a few more conversations, more of an understanding of what's going on, sometimes can be a big turnoff for them, and they don't return.
Yeah, like saying you have to have your animal spayed or neutered. If you're going to have food bank, you're going to your dog or cat's not vaccinated. Oh, we have to take care of that before you can get food, or you're only allowed this much food a week, and or once a month, are all kind of barriers to accessing these programs that are really at the heart of it supposed to be helping animals.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
They're definitely not feeding people, and if depending on how they manage the food bank, most likely won't be selling the food. It's truly to go back to helping. All right, barriers to getting access to spay and neuter.
Well, I can speak to you in a lot of times, in really broad strokes. So, I was in Los Angeles before this, and Los Angeles really had a great program where their city shelter would offer spay and neuter resources to people in the community. But there was a lot of red tape to it. So sometimes bureaucracy can be a big barrier. Like, however you feel about people that are or are not undocumented, a lot of them live in the community like Los Angeles that have pets, and we really care about pets. So if you're requiring them to put themselves on record, to have a license, to do all of this stuff before they can get a spay and neuter, oftentimes it's a barrier. I think things like, just putting a lot of stipulations on this stuff, like, you can only have one per year, two per year, or, that kind of thing. You can only have this many animals. There's just, a lot of, crossover between trying to provide a kindness and a service to your community, but also being very, being too structured and potentially harsh in regards to who qualifies. So it ends up being the people that actually really need the service, somehow are pushed away from actually getting it.
Yeah. Jessica, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do see a lot of low-cost spay neuter clinics charging fees, which are very reasonable. However, the people that really need it, it's a lot for them. For example, maybe $100 for a large dog to get spayed or neutered. Most people can do that, but there are people that really are trying to decide between like gas to get to work or food to feed their kids. And the $100, that's just out of the question. So I definitely feel that that's a huge barrier. And I know I've seen some places try to address that by having them prove their income, which I don't necessarily personally agree with, but I definitely think that there needs to be a way to help those people most at risk.
Yeah, and Mandy, other things too that are really specific are like, a lot of veterinary clinics are like, you do drop off between 7:30 and 8, that's it. You only do, you know what I mean? Very, very rigid in regards to how you can do it. And what if you are working 2 jobs and 7:30 to 8 will never work for you, and you don't have transportation? If you're a minute or 2 late, they're not letting you in. Like, there's a lot of clinics that really operate that way. So helping them figure out a way that's not, messing with kind of the flow of what they're trying to get done for that day, so they can get it done and finish at the same time, but also be a little bit more customer and client based and understanding of the fact that sometimes those short windows are really difficult and huge barriers.
Yeah, it almost feels like, this could be a completely different subject of conversation, but there's an empathy gap where people just aren't getting it. I was at Expo last year for in the booth for our home program, and 2 ladies came up and they said, I would never do this. I don't trust my community. They're just going to take their animals and give them away for free and not have them spayed and neutered and all this. And then I said, well, you know, this is about empowering your community. And she said, you know, we already know that we have a community that's not great. We offer a free spay and neuter clinic once a month at 5:30 a.m. and nobody shows up. And I'm like, oh my God, well, a lot of these people might be getting off work, or they may have been off work at 3 and they're sleeping. So I think sometimes we get on our high horse and thinking that people need to, if they're going to have our service, they need to come to us when we're, you know, and it really is paying attention to even talking to the human service providers in your community and understanding who are your community, because everything that you've just described, and especially Mark about Los Angeles and all this work that's being done on transferring out and helping with population, and how are we going to do that when people are scared to death to put themselves out there to get services because they might be deported?
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
Crazy.
That's right.
The other thing, and this is somewhat off topic, that I think is somewhat resonates in the conversation, is that we really have to, and I think this is like humans in general, have to realize the power of influence. And we really influence people by finding common ground, and we may not get what we want right off the bat. But in building those relationships with people at intake, when they're, like you were saying, Jessica, when the return to owner, and you're building a rapport with them where you're like, why does your dog keep getting out? It's kind of crazy. Like, we keep seeing you. What's going on? Oh, you know, I've got a hole in my fence. Well, you know what? We can totally help you with that. Like, you build lifelong influential relationships with the people who you really want to impact by having a softer, long-term approach rather than the punitive, transactional approach.
Right.
Okay, so we've kind of talked about this, like receiving assistance. Like, you know, if there's a helpline, what do people have to do to get approved for the helpline? But I think let's talk a little bit, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Let's talk a little bit about some of the maybe unconscious barriers that we put around fundraising and marketing to our community. This might challenge you guys a little bit.
I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Oh, good. Okay. So Mark, go for it.
So one of the communities like Jessica works in is in South Texas, like literally as far south as you can go. And one of the areas that I've noticed in the shelters that we've worked out there is they're very and solely focused on a certain population of that, you know, area. So for instance, we're talking about the Rio Grande Valley, it's Hidalgo County, right on the border of Mexico. So in the fundraising aspect, I think the one thing that, just like everything else that we're talking about, their scope is on the 10% white population, upper middle class, high middle class, and that's great. But you have this huge area that, yes, you might not get the $10,000, $20,000 gift, but you have 1 million people there. And if you could get, you know, little things, you know, starting with, you know, what we call middle donor programs and speaking to a lot of these people, I've heard people down there tell me, you know, this Hispanic population does not do donations, but, you know, when you walk into every store that you're going in there, there's money full of water bottles where people are throwing their change in, they're throwing money in, you know, and if you just do the math, you know, if you could get, you know, if you have 1 million people there and you can get 50,000 people to give you $5, which is totally doable, you know, and really kind of not just worrying about everything being at the top pyramid of fundraising and finding all of those major donors, but having a very substantial way of engaging donors at lower levels that could be continual gifts, right? Like even if they're giving you $5, $10 a month, every couple of months, that stuff adds up. And it goes back to what we're talking about. You're establishing a relationship with these folks. So oftentimes they're going to become your adopters. They're going to become your foster homes. They're going to become people that can spread the services. And so a lot of times when a lot of us think of donor dollars, we want to go straight to the richest of the rich in the community and often discount a lot of the people that, yeah, they don't have as much, you know, extra money to give around, but, you know, sparing a cup of coffee that they're used to giving a day, one time a month or things like that is absolutely doable and works in a lot of different communities if you just engage that part of your fundraising strategy.
I went to Harlingen Shelter for a couple weeks to do a mentorship with them, and I kind of experienced some of that firsthand. It's one of the more poor areas in the country, and there were barriers with adoption fees. This isn't quite fundraising, but they were very expensive. And so we did a name your price adoption day, and we would be lucky if we had a couple adoptions a day. Then we did that. I think it was 60 adoptions, I think, that we had that day. The community showed up, and we were so busy. They were waiting hours to get their adoption completed because there were so many. So it really just proved to me like how wonderful that community was, and it was really inspiring. But as far as the donations, I see some of that in the shelter I'm working in now. It's not like a richer area, I guess you would say. So there's a attitude that perhaps there won't be a lot of donors, but there's also where the shelter isn't really telling the community what their needs are. And when you start expressing those needs and asking for help, they come through. And this past Giving Tuesday, we did a fundraising campaign to raise $3,500, and we had the first $1,600 matched by an anonymous donor, and we were raising it for cat portals, which are retrofitted doors in between the kennels to give the cats more space. We ended up exceeding our goal by roughly $1,600. So it just goes to show, if you just ask your community and communicate with them and be open and transparent and tell them what you need and what you're trying to do, they'll come through for you.
Yeah, I think that's like such a great story to show. And I think that really everything that we're talking about is collaborating, it's building communication and the sense of community, that you're equal with your community. And when you do that, you see everybody donate, because everybody starts to get this sense of community and connection. And like with, when you look at your lower income populations, they, like, those communities of people we all should be jealous. Like, they have the best sense of community. They're all helping each other.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's amazing. But what also happens is, if you're a butthead to somebody, everybody's going to know that you were. And so it creates these barriers. So kindness is really a pay it forward. So you're kind to that one person, you help them, and then the next person you're kind to, and all of a sudden your community looks at you in a different way. And I would even go as far as to say that when we use abandoned, neglected, abused words,
educate.
That's a good one. And I catch myself doing that all the time, and I have
we all do. We all slip up, but those are very condescending terms for you coming into a community that you're obviously an outsider, and they're kind of getting your agenda right away.
Yeah, rather, you're not necessarily influencing them, you're educating them. So
no, you're building a wall.
Yeah, totally. So when we do that, though, when I look at like this unconscious idea of shame, as an organization, if you're putting all your stories out there about how horrible people are the community, or even the adoption contracts that say if you can't care for your pet, you have to bring your animal back to us. Are you creating an environment where your community knows that you've got their back, like that you're going to help them? Probably not. And people don't realize, I think, that subconscious messaging. I know for me, I'd be like, oh my gosh, if I go get help, are they going to mark me as one of those people that is abusing my animal because his nails haven't been trimmed, but I can't afford it and I really want to get his nails trimmed, but I'm really freaking out about going to them because I hear all these negative stories coming from them. So I think that there's this bigger arching idea of helping people feel really comfortable with the organization. So the fear around removing barriers, because I know that Jessica, you're in a shelter, and I should say, I don't think I said it, that you're with Best Friends as well, and you're part of I think it's the Embed program. So you're in a shelter that had traditionally high euthanasia, and you come in and work with the staff to help kind of transform that, right?
That is correct, yes.
Perfect. So you have to see firsthand, like with working, and you've done that work too, I think, Mark. But can you talk about just the general struggles that shelters have with kind of overcoming and letting go of their fear and being brave?
Yeah, that's very difficult because it is part of their culture. And this particular shelter, there are many staff members who've been there many years. So this is just ingrained in them and ingrained in who they are. So presenting something different is a bit of a challenge for them to come to terms of acceptance. And because they really feel that what they're doing is protecting the animal. I try to explain like the bigger picture to them, that you are able to save more animals, move them out faster, and by trusting in these people, you're still having positive outcomes. And one thing that we did try and instill in them would be a failed adoption is better than no adoption, because there would be a lot of pushback, like, what if an elderly person comes in and wants a big dog, it's going to knock them over, all kinds of weird scenarios like that. And we just tried to tell them a failed adoption is better than no adoption, and emphasize the positives with that, such as you're going to learn a lot more about how the animal is in a home environment, how they are with certain types of people and other animals. And then the animal gets out of the shelter too, which is, much nicer to have a home environment and a much more enriched life. And I mean, it hasn't been easy, because there have been some that do have difficulty with it and don't agree. And then there are some that really do love the change. But we made the change to go to open adoptions by removing some of the traditional barriers that we had, like the fence, vet check, animals at home, spayed and neutered. We got rid of all of that. And it wasn't we planned to do that anyway. But when COVID came, it was just essential that we implemented it right away, because otherwise there's going to be a delay getting the animals out that we didn't have the luxury of being able to work with. And so I think now the staff is seeing that we have less animals in, and we've also kind of removed some of those barriers for fosters too, because there were similar requirements. So now we have been, I mean, I know COVID is impacting this as well because we have limited intake, but instead of having 200 plus animals in the shelter, there's usually around 30 right now and about 80 in foster care. So they're seeing that there's more time, more animals are out in better environments in a foster home. And then the animals that we do have, they have more time that they can dedicate to them and give them personalized time, and even work with some that perhaps may be a little shy or need a little extra training. So I think it's coming around and they are finally accepting it. It wasn't necessarily easy, but I think when people see the end result and they also see that there aren't any bad things happening with the animals that were adopted, yeah, I think it's kind of that's when they finally start to realize that it does work if you approach people by being trusting in them.
Yeah, no, totally. And I kind of break it down in my experience into 4 different categories. First category that luckily now in animal welfare we have a lot of information on is just getting statistical information to your teams, right, or your shelters. 97% of people that you turn down will get a pet somewhere else. That's not an indication on its own that you should always say yes, but they're gonna find a pet. So, stats on, pets as gifts, stats on like a lot of myths in animal welfare that are absolute no's, and really going to that. So you have a section of shelters or teams and rescues that you can affect with giving them more information and facts. Most shelters and rescues do not operate, and it's pretty well known that even though people understand and hear what you're saying in regards to facts, if they're emotionally attached, that's where you have to actually emotionally help them understand, versus facts won't move them. So then you have that second category where it's like giving them informational stories about trying to get them to relate to some of these people. To your point earlier, we often see ourselves as animal experts, and we are. But sometimes just because you're an animal expert, these are living sentient beings. They are not laptops or iPhones. They operate And I don't care what their breeds are. They're individual animals that will react differently depending on what they are. So you don't know everything, and kind of getting to the point of really being comfortable with alleviating some of that control, trying to set up people's expectations, besides being the animal expert that knows every situation and who the right home is. And often trying to just get them to see themselves in these people's eyes. To your point, you were talking about going into places with fear. I talk a lot about it as insecurity. Like if I go to a mechanic, I'm always afraid. I don't know anything about cars. So I'm always afraid that they're going to take me for a ride. I don't want to look stupid. And that's where a lot of people are coming at us in animal shelters. I think, you know, the other area that's really important, Mandy, is, and I can relate to this personally, is I'm somebody that started in animal welfare and personally ended the lives of thousands of animals that were healthy, treatable animals for population control purposes. And it took me a while to conceptualize the fact that that didn't have to happen, and my own place in that, and how I kind of get myself to relate, to move forward from that and not be trapped in kind of like, what does that mean to the years that I spent doing this? And really, and that's a kind of a bigger philosophical issue, but I think I see that a lot, and especially people that have a really hard time in grasping that aspect of things, if that makes sense. Like, I can't believe that I could do it differently, because what does that make me? And I think it just makes you as an evolving person. You know, and I think the last thing is, again, it kind of is what I talked about in the second thing is some of it is ego. And I hate to say that, but it really is. If you're a specialized behavior person, if you're a vet, if you're somebody that's worked in the industry, sometimes your experience can make you extremely rigid and unapologetically egotistical in regards to your condescending potentially view on people that you think need to be experts on anything before you'll give them an animal. So I think it's a whole variety of aspects there, but you have to understand kind of some of those, you know, and I'm being very generalistic, but those are the four kind of components of people generally that I've seen that you have to try to pick off and figure out ways to help bring all of those people along.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, Mark, because what your, at least my interpretation of what you're saying and your story is that you are pretty comfortable within yourself and you're okay with being vulnerable. And you're saying, you know what, I'm not perfect, and I didn't even know I was making a mistake then. It was just
Right.
what we did. And what I see, and actually a lot of data sharing, we see shelters that won't even share their data. And it just shows you that they are not comfortable being vulnerable. And we have a hard time in this sector. You really have to be a brave leader to push forward, because you're really getting attacked for doing the right thing, and that people think you're doing the wrong thing. Like, there's a shelter in Florida that I have talked to that is, I mean, I don't remember now where it's at, but they're trying so hard to not euthanize anymore. And they decided that they weren't going to take in any community cats. And yet all the rescues that were attacking them for euthanizing are now attacking them for not taking in community cats. And we know that they're following best practice and they're doing a good job, but you have to be kind of a pretty solid leader to be able to say, we're not doing it right and we know, and we really want to learn on how to do it better. It's very tricky.
Well, haters gonna hate, right, Mandy? So I think no matter what happens, I think a lot of us are surprised with the fact that you are going to be in the public view and people are going to hate you if you get into this field. And that was something I was completely I was not expecting and completely unprepared for. But at the same time, I think the bravery that comes with being transparent and those kind of things, it's true. But I think the realization that I hope a lot of shelter and rescue people understand is no matter what, you're going to have people that are coming after you. So at some point in time, you know, if you're hiding things from them, oftentimes they're using their imaginations as to what's actually going on in your shelter. And at least if you're being transparent, you know, you can hopefully try to turn some of that on your community to help you be more of a solution-based. Yeah, this is what we're struggling with. These are the animals that we want to save. We're being clear about it. So how can you know, what are you going to do to help us?
Can you imagine the stress of not only being attacked, but also knowing that you're lying or that you're not being fully transparent? It would like eat me alive. I'm like the oversharer. because I would rather be like, lay it out on the table, because at least I know I laid it on the table and I have to suffer the consequences of it rather than trying to hide things. That stresses me out, even the thought of it. All right, well, I feel like this was an excellent conversation, and I'm looking over my notes, and like, we really touched a lot of area. Do you guys have anything to add as your like final comments? If you have books or webinars or anything, podcasts, anything that you've been watching that you think people would benefit from?
I know there was a Maddie's Fund study conducted on pet retention rates, and I believe it was through reduced adoption fees. I think that's an interesting one for people exploring removing barriers. Sometimes you see, or I've heard people say, if they can't afford certain adoption fee, they shouldn't get a pet. And that's a barrier view. And I think looking at that study to show that really those fears aren't really true or happening I definitely recommend that. I think that's a good one. And I share that with a lot of people who are in the barrier mindset. I'm sure if you just went on Maddie's Fund website and searched for study on reduced pet adoption fees, you can find it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I want to share, Mandy, with you, we have a fun little module that really touches on a lot of what we talked about here. It's really interactive. It's got some videos. You can see an animated Marc Peralta in it. But it really goes about some of these tenets and helping shelters and rescue rethink their specifically client service and adoption, which really plays into a lot of what we talked about here. So I want to share that with you. And Best Friends has a slew of information on our page. It's network.bestfriends.org. So please check that out. And I think the last thing I would just say is, and this is really in a lot, and hopefully the overriding thing, if you do check out the little portal that I'm going to send to you, is we have to really reverse the concept of what we're trying to get to with adoptions, and not being interrogators, being somebody that's trying to understand what people are looking for, helping set up expectations, and being okay that we are the animal experts to some extent, and the people that are trying to adopt from us it's okay that they're not at the same level as us, because people do figure things out. And if you as a rescue or a shelter cannot think of things as a transactional action, but actually carrying on a relationship through all of the things that potentially can happen to any human being over the lifetime of a pet, you're going to help that person really grow into what you're trying to get at is, a more advanced pet owner. But you can't do it in a transaction, and you certainly can't do it in an interrogation. And those are the things that I think I want to leave with people. We are people. We learn through experience and time. You don't learn through somebody landing on a soapbox and educating you. It's just not how things happen. And that's going to help you ultimately achieve more adoptions, better support, and really helping, animals who are healthy, treatable, get out of shelters alive and become valued pets in their homes.
Absolutely. And for anyone that's listening, Best Friends has great data on the website, like just a ton of data to support. But you guys, when was that? You just did the study like not that long ago. It's the most up-to-date data, right? National data.
Yeah, we do it every year, and it's community life-saving dashboard. It's on our website, so you could easily just Google community life-saving dashboard Best Friends, but you can see where your community and how your community is doing in the aspect of life-saving. And this is a tool not just to out shelters. We want people to be transparent. This is a tool for you to understand what's going on with shelters in your community and get to work and help them.
That's great. Well, thank you both for your time. I appreciate it. And thank you everybody for listening. This is Mandy Evans. You're listening to People Are Animals Too. Darn it. And we welcome your feedback and comments. Thank you.